Within the soil of Illinois, more than just history lies buried. There are secrets here, ancient ramparts without a known architect, inscriptions that defy translation, and echoes of societies that have long since disappeared. These are not merely puzzles. They're cautions etched in stone. Consider the lost civilization of Cahokia. Envision a metropolis more populous than London, flourishing a millennium ago, well before Europeans conceived of a new world. Now, imagine that great city decaying in silence, its people vanishing as if in a thin air, leaving behind nothing but immense earthen pyramids, sprawling plazas, and clues that only hint at its former glory. This is Cahokia. Cahokia was no simple settlement. It was a vast and intricate urban hub, the shining achievement of the Mississippian culture. Reaching its zenith around the year 1100, it spanned nearly 6 square miles close to where Collinsville, Illinois, stands today, sheltering a population estimated at 20,000 or more. This exceeded the size of medieval London during the same period. The city featured colossal platform mounds, a magnificent central plaza, solar calendars made of wood known as wood hinges, elaborate ceremonial grounds, and a deeply stratified society. This was not a primitive outpost. It was a civilization. At the city's core rose Monk's Mound, the most massive prehistoric earthwork in the Americas, soaring 100 feet high and covering more than 14 acres. It remains a mystery how the Mississippians managed to transport such a staggering volume of earth using only woven baskets, animal bones, and wooden implements. They moved over 22 million cubic feet of soil by hand, an accomplishment of logistics, labor, and vision that stands among the greatest in pre-Columbian North America. Yet, the element that most perplexes historians and archaeologists is not its size, but its enigma. How did such a sophisticated society emerge so far from the more recognized centers of Mesoamerica? And more urgently, what triggered its abrupt and silent demise? The answer is far from simple. Cahokia operated on a strict class hierarchy. The ruling class dwelled atop the mounds, while the common people resided in thatched roof houses below. Their existence was governed by rituals, sacrificial practices, and celestial phenomena. Archaeologists have uncovered mass burial sites containing headless skeletons, sacrificed women, and evidence of fierce warfare. One pit, located behind a mound, contained the remains of over 50 young women, likely part of a ritual offering. Some scholars suggest Cahokia's elite leveraged cosmic events to assert their authority. They monitored the sun's movements with great timber circles, enormous wooden versions of Stonehenge, to forecast eclipses and solstices. These were not amateur astronomers. They aligned their temples with celestial bodies, weaving together time and power. But in the end, the foundation of their world crumbled. By 1350, Cahokia was mostly deserted. A city of thousands dwindled into silent mounds and forgotten farmlands. The reasons are debated. Some point to the depletion of resources. The dense population might have overhunted local game, exhausted the soil with maize farming, and clear-cut the surrounding forests. This deforestation could have led to catastrophic flooding and erosion. Situated near the Mississippi River, Cahokia may have been undone by its own success as sediment accumulated and flood patterns shifted. Others suggest climate change played a role. A lengthy drought, part of what is known as the Little Ice Age, struck just as the city's population was at its peak. Crops would have withered, and starvation would have followed, likely leading to social upheaval. Cahokia's ceremonial squares may have transformed into battlefields. There is also evidence of outside threats. In its final century, fortified palisades were erected around the city's key mounds. Not mere fences, but defensive ramparts with bastions designed to repel organized armies. Cahokia could have been besieged by rival groups, or even by its own fractured populace. And there is a spiritual dimension to consider. When the rituals no longer brought the desired results, when the sun's return was not as predicted, when sacrifices failed to conjure rain, did the people's faith in their leaders collapse? Imagine a priestly class, once believed to command the heavens, suddenly exposed as powerless. This could have ignited internal chaos. What makes Cahokia's decline particularly strange is the absence of direct proof. There is no sign of a great final battle, no written history, no clear oral traditions that survived. No conquering force left its signature. It seems as though the people simply dissolved into the wilderness, leaving their mounds to be overtaken by nature. One generation thrived there, the next was gone. The first European settlers could not believe that Native Americans were capable of constructing these mounds. They attributed them to a vanished race, perhaps the Aztecs or even ancient Egyptians. The reality is both simpler and more astounding. These were indigenous engineers, astronomers, and urban planners who, for a time, dominated the Mississippi Valley. Today, only around 80 of the more than 120 original mounds are still standing. Roads and agriculture have obliterated the others. The core of Cahokia is now a state historic site, but it is encroached upon by modern sprawl. Standing atop Monk's Mound, one can see gas stations, parking lots, and highways, a stark juxtaposition with what once was. Cahokia serves as a reminder of how delicate even the most advanced societies can be. It recounts a narrative of creativity, ambition, and possibly arrogance. In the silence it left, with no scrolls, no inscribed temples, no legends that endured past European contact, makes its story all the more resonant. The people who built Cahokia did not disappear entirely. Their descendants are scattered among various Native American tribes throughout the Midwest and South. But the city itself, its philosophy, its rituals, its leadership, and its fall, that story is still buried under Illinois soil, an open question. Cahokia is a riddle that confronts us with its massive earthen forms, challenging us to remember. Not just to remember that it existed, but to question why it was lost, and to wonder if our own cities of steel and glass might one day face a similar, quiet conclusion. In the shadow of the monumental Cahokia complex lies a less prominent feature that harbors mysteries just as profound, the Emerald Mound. While not as grand or well-known as Monk's Mound, Emerald is a part of the same cultural landscape. Situated a few miles east of Cahokia's center, this gentle elevation might appear as a natural hill to an uninformed observer. But this was a deliberately crafted structure, oriented to the cosmos and linked to a forgotten system of spiritual and societal organization. This is not the more famous Emerald Mound of Mississippi. It is Illinois' concealed counterpart, frequently ignored. What distinguishes this mound is not only its structure, but its placement, its alignment, and the lingering mystery of its original meaning to its builders. While the main Cahokia site served as the political and ceremonial heart, places like Emerald functioned as supporting nodes in a far broader, interconnected network. This was not a solitary city, but a web of civilization. What little is understood about the Emerald Mound's purpose is derived from its orientation. Archaeologists have long proposed that its position was intentional. It aligns with the rising sun during the equinoxes, mirroring similar alignments at the Cahokia woodhenges. These timber circles, which resembled a wooden Stonehenge, were instrumental in tracking celestial events like solstices and equinoxes. Emerald appears to be an extension of that cosmic calendar system, indicating it had a ceremonial function tied to the rhythm of the seasons. Picture yourself there, over 900 years in the past, as the sun emerged perfectly on the horizon during the spring equinox. People would have assembled, the soft beat of drums in the air, smoke ascending from ceremonial fires, all eyes directed to the heavens. For the Mississippians, time was not merely a unit of measure, it was a sacred power. Aligning with the sun was a means of aligning with the divine, with universal balance, and with the cycle of existence. But what precise activities took place on the Emerald Mound? This is where the enigma deepens. In contrast to Monk's Mound, which shows signs of residences and ceremonial buildings, Emerald offers very few clues. There are no known burials, no significant collections of artifacts, and no clear structural remains on its summit. just earth, shaped with intention, yet strangely mute. Was it a platform for elite rituals? A spiritual landmark serving as a stopover during equinox processions? Some scholars suggest it could have been part of a pilgrimage route that led from outlying sacred locations to the heart of Cahokia. If so, it points to a much more expansive religious geography than was previously considered. Others venture further, suggesting the Emerald Mound marked more than just the seasons. It might have aligned with other celestial occurrences or star patterns that are now lost to us. In some reconstructions of Mississippian cosmology, the universe was a three-tiered realm where stars were spirits. Celestial pathways guided the souls of the dead, and the horizon was a curtain between worlds. Could Emerald have functioned as a literal and symbolic gateway between these realms? And then there's its name, Emerald. Though modern, it hints at our current perception of these sites as hidden gems in a landscape that has been forgotten and reclaimed by nature. The mound is now covered with grass, shrubs, and trees, giving it a natural appearance that masks its human origins. For generations, farmers plowed the land around it, either unaware of or indifferent to its deeper significance. More unsettling is the knowledge that many other similar mounds once dotted the area. Some were leveled for development, while others were worn away by time and neglect. The Emerald Mound, therefore, may not be a singular enigma, but one of the last remnants of a lost ceremonial grid that once spanned the region. Here, the mystery becomes sharper. Why construct a mound so distant from the main city and leave it so devoid of artifacts? One theory is that Emerald was deliberately kept pure, a sacred space not intended for settlement or burial. Certain traditions hold that holy ground should remain unblemished, free from the activities of daily life. This could account for the absence of material evidence. The builders were not leaving behind tools or bones. They were commemorating a moment, a point on the calendar, a spiritual alignment rather than a physical one. Or perhaps the evidence was taken away. Emerald's limited excavation means we are still unaware of what lies beneath its surface. It has not received the same level of scholarly attention as Cahokia proper. Our knowledge comes from aerial surveys, surface analysis, and mapping. This brings us to a modern development, LiDAR technology. This laser scanning system, which can map landforms through dense foliage, has recently uncovered other subtle mounds and earthworks in the area. Some appear to echo Emerald's placement. Could this be the beginning of a much larger discovery? Even now, local folklore continues. Some people living nearby have reported strange lights hovering over the mound, shifting winds that spiral in unnatural ways, and even dreams connected to the site. These stories are, of course, anecdotal, but in a narrative already rich with vanished cultures and cosmic puzzles, they contribute to this sense of unease. Visitors often report feeling something there, even if they cannot articulate what it is. In many respects, the Emerald Mound is a symbol not only of the Mississippians, but also of the fragility of ancient memory. A single mound, nearly erased by indifference and the passage of time, might hold an entire chapter of a forgotten religion, a lost science, or a vanished social custom. And it is not unique. Across Illinois, countless unassuming hills may conceal the same secrets, waiting for the right questions to be asked. In the end, the Emerald Mound is a whisper. It is not as loud as Monk's Mound or as striking as a Woodhenge, but it remains. It is steady, aligned, and resolute, pointing toward a rising sun that continues to appear, even though the civilization that once honored it has long gone silent. In the tranquil fields and gentle hills of 19th century Illinois, peculiar accounts began to emerge. Farmers, while digging into old earthen mounds, reported finding something startling. It wasn't just arrowheads or pottery fragments, but skeletons of gigantic humans. Reports from newspapers, personal letters, and county archives described remains measuring well over 7 feet in height. Some accounts even claimed heights of 8 or 9 feet, with enormous skulls, dual rows of teeth, and atypical bone structures. In an age before systematic archaeology, Many of these discoveries were relegated to folklore or dismissed as fabrications. Yet the reports persisted, appearing throughout the state, from near Alton and Madison County to the riverbanks of the Illinois and Mississippi, and even close to Springfield. So, who were these giant skeletons, and why did they keep appearing in locations tied to ancient burial mounds? Let's begin with the mounds themselves. These earthworks were primarily built by the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian cultures over a span of thousands of years. They interred their dead with great reverence, often in specific arrangements and sometimes accompanied by offerings or grave goods. But occasionally, someone would excavate a mound and discover a skeleton that defied the expected norms. The bones were too large, the limbs too long, the structure too robust. Jaws were said to be wide enough to fit over a contemporary adult's face. Some skulls were flattened or had unusually prominent brows. Were these simply exceptionally tall individuals? This is the conventional view. A few very tall people were buried in ceremonial sites, and that's all there is to it. However, some of these accounts describe entire collections of oversized skeletons, with 7 or more giants buried together, as if they were part of a distinct class or even a separate race. This is where the story becomes more obscure. Newspapers of the 1800s were known for their dramatic flair. Sensational stories sold copies. But they were also the primary channel for reporting local finds before academic institutions became involved. Many of these articles name eyewitnesses, farmers, amateur excavators, and even doctors who measured femurs and estimated heights using the methods available to them. While not scientific, their accounts were not necessarily deceitful. One of the most frequently mentioned cases occurred in 1871 near Alton, Illinois. Laborers digging into a mound uncovered a skeleton reported to be over 9 feet long. According to local lore, its skull was large enough to be worn like a helmet by an average-sized man. Other finds from the late 1800s near the Illinois River described giants buried with weapons, stone implements, or copper ornaments. Could these have been ceremonial burials of esteemed warriors, or were they something else entirely? The remnants of a forgotten people? This is where the oral traditions of Native Americans become relevant. Various tribes in the Midwest, including the Ojibwe and the Sioux, have legends about a time when giants walked the earth. In some narratives, they were formidable adversaries who had to be defeated through cleverness or divine power. Other stories portray them as ancient architects, strong and intelligent, but ultimately fated for extinction. Were these tales metaphorical? It's possible, but it's difficult to ignore the parallels between these legends and the 19th century reports, especially when some accounts mention burned mounds or signs of violent death, suggesting these giants were exterminated or buried en masse after conflict. By the early 20th century, the situation began to shift. The Smithsonian Institution and other academic organizations started to take an interest in mound excavations, and a curious pattern emerged. The stories of giant skeletons started to fade away. Researchers would excavate, document, and publish their findings, but there was no further mention of giants. In fact, some allege that skeletal remains sent to the Smithsonian simply vanished, and that the institution actively sought to discredit the idea of prehistoric giants. This theory, sometimes referred to as the Smithsonian cover-up, is a mix of fact and conspiracy. It is true that in the early 1900s, the Smithsonian amassed thousands of skeletal remains, most of which were never put on public display and are either held in archives or have been reinterred. It is also true that early anthropology was dedicated to creating a scientific framework for ancient America, one that had little tolerance for myth. But whether bones were deliberately concealed or not, a significant gap persists between local legend and the institutional record. What one group described as giants, another termed tall individuals with medical anomalies. What one saw as proof of a lost race, another dismissed as simple misidentification. There's also a biological explanation. Gigantism and acromegaly, rare disorders caused by hormonal irregularities, can lead to exceptional growth. It's plausible that a few individuals in ancient societies had these conditions and were buried with special ceremony, either feared or honored. Over time, their remains may have inspired the legends. But this doesn't account for the group burials or the sheer volume of reports that span decades and multiple counties. It doesn't explain the consistent size measurements or the similarities to legends told long before any newspaper became involved. So, what are we to make of these stories? Today, many of the mounds where these skeletons were reportedly found are gone, plowed over, developed upon, or eroded away. The bones, if they ever existed, are also gone, either reburied, lost in archives, or turned to dust. All that is left are the accounts. Some are preserved in yellowed newspaper clippings, while others are retellings passed down through generations. But they endure. And perhaps that is the most unsettling aspect of it all. Not just the mystery of the giants, but the erasure of the mystery itself. Something was discovered. People witnessed it. They recorded it. And yet, we are left with silence. Whether the giant skeletons of Illinois were real or not is almost beside the point. The true story may be how quickly we forget, or are encouraged to forget, what doesn't align with our accepted narrative of the past, how easily bones can turn to dust, and how sometimes the most significant clues are buried not only in the earth but in the gaps of the official story. Along the Rock River near Dixon, Illinois, a placid stretch of land conceals another unresolved puzzle, one carved not into the ground, but into the very bedrock of the region. Hidden on stone outcrops and limestone formations are a series of peculiar petroglyphs, ancient carvings etched into rock, worn by time, but still faintly discernible. Some appear to be animals, others resemble geometric patterns, and a few look like nothing known to modern science or indigenous art. Locals refer to them as the Dixon petroglyphs, and their origin is one of Illinois' most cryptic archaeological riddles. The first official record of them appeared in the early 20th century when hikers and amateur explorers found odd markings carved into the exposed limestone. These were not random etchings or modern graffiti. They were intentional, often repeated symbols arranged in specific clusters. At first, they looked like Native American work, but upon closer examination, many of the images did not align with known tribal motifs. There were no representations of arrows, animal spirits, or accounts of war, just enigmatic glyphs, loops, crosses, spirals, and dots arranged in orderly grids. Some archaeologists wrote them off as natural weathering or the work of 19th century pioneers, but others remained unconvinced. These petroglyphs showed depth, uniformity, and were located in places that hinted at ceremonial importance. Who would invest hours carving into solid limestone without a purpose? And why position them on cliff edges or near water? That last detail is significant. Many of the petroglyphs are found near river bends, springs, or rock shelters, locations traditionally associated with ritual activity in ancient cultures. Water was often seen as a gateway between worlds. Rock shelters were considered sacred, and the act of carving into stone was not a casual one. It was meant to be permanent, ceremonial, and perhaps deeply spiritual. One hypothesis suggests these carvings could be from the Archaic period, thousands of years before Cahokia's rise. If correct, they would predate any known writing system in North America. So, what message were they trying to convey? Some scholars speculate the Dixon petroglyphs might be primitive maps, marking sacred locations, seasonal encampments, or celestial orientations. Others think they could be star charts, documenting constellations and solstice points. A few fringe theorists even propose they are evidence of pre-Columbian voyages, suggesting that ancient mariners from across the Atlantic might have traveled inland via rivers and left their inscriptions. It's not just the shapes that are intriguing, but also their precision. Some carvings form flawless circles or intersecting lines with angles that seem too exact to be accidental. One particular grouping displays a pattern resembling a labyrinth, similar in form to Old World motifs discovered in Crete and Northern Europe. Is it a coincidence? Perhaps, but it adds a strange layer of possibility to an already perplexing discovery. Then there is the perplexing question of why this site is not more famous. The answer might be its ambiguous status. Because these carvings do not fit neatly into the established timelines or artistic traditions of known Illinois tribes, they have been largely overlooked by mainstream archaeology. Without a clear cultural link or a way to radiocarbon date stone, the site remains officially unconfirmed, just an intriguing anomaly rather than a protected historical landmark. This hasn't prevented local researchers and explorers from becoming captivated by it. Photographs taken over the past half-century show glyphs that have since eroded or vanished completely, while new ones have been revealed by shifting weather patterns or erosion. Some believe the entire area could be part of a larger, hidden network with more carvings buried under layers of silt or moss, waiting to be found. It's more than an intellectual exercise. For those who have visited the site and traced the grooves made by long-vanished hands, it's an emotional experience. There's a tangible energy, a feeling of presence, as if someone intended to leave a message, not for their own people, but for the future. Yet, that message remains untranslated. Even more baffling is that no modern tribe has laid claim to them. Not the Sauk, not the Fox, not the Potawatomi, the tribes who inhabited the region during historical times. When questioned, tribal elders often give vague or non-committal answers. Some state they do not recognize the symbols. Others whisper that they are not meant to be understood, that they belong to a people who came before. In indigenous traditions across North America, there are often tales of the ancient ones, not ancestors but predecessors, spirits, or beings who walked the earth before recorded memory. Perhaps the petroglyphs are their legacy, or maybe they were never meant for our comprehension at all. One final piece of the puzzle is particularly striking. Some carvings appear to have been re-etched over time, as if someone repeatedly returned to maintain them, to sharpen their lines. These were not simply abandoned messages. They were curated, preserved, possibly for generations, until their guardians eventually disappeared or ceased their visits, and the glyphs were left to fade. Today, the Dixon petroglyphs are slowly dying. Moss, acid rain, foot traffic, and neglect are wearing them down year by year. There is no sign, no protective fence, no official preservation. You can walk right up to them if you know where to find them, and most people do not. So what are they? A lost form of writing, astronomical charts, territorial markers, shamanic visions etched in stone? Or perhaps they are something even more disconcerting, a form of communication we have entirely lost the capacity to interpret, like a warning carved in a language we never learned. A voice from the deep past, still speaking, but unheard. In the serene woodlands of northern Illinois, where the landscape gradually descends toward Lake Michigan, there are traces of something extraordinary. Ancient copper implements, fragments of smelted metal, and deep scars in the earth that point to a long-forgotten mystery. While Michigan's Upper Peninsula is more renowned for its prehistoric copper mining, northern Illinois presents its own less-known puzzle. Evidence that early peoples may have been mining copper here long before Europeans arrived on the continent. It starts with the artifacts discovered in riverbeds, fields, and old mound sites across northern Illinois. Archaeologists have unearthed hammerstones, grooved mauls, and even pieces of pure copper fashioned into hooks, spearheads, and beads. What is striking is the purity of this copper, nearly 99% pure, and the complete lack of evidence of modern smelting techniques. These tools were not cast. They were cold-hammered, a method employed by ancient cultures skilled in working soft metals without the use of fire. This in itself is not unusual. What is unusual is the sheer quantity of it found far from the established mining centers of Michigan, and how little is known about who gathered it, where it was mined, and how it was distributed. Some of these copper items in Illinois date back over 5,000 years, making them older than the Egyptian pyramids. So, where did this copper originate? The conventional explanation is that Illinois was a part of an extensive trade network that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Tribes exchanged obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, seashells from the Atlantic, and copper from Lake Superior. This network was real and is well documented, but it doesn't account for everything. Certain copper artifacts discovered in Illinois, particularly in areas like Joe Daviess County and the Rock River Basin, show microscopic indications of local sourcing. This implies that people here were not just trading for copper. They may have been mining it themselves. This is where the situation becomes enigmatic. Natural copper deposits do exist in parts of northern Illinois, but they are small and dispersed, not the kind of locations where one would expect large-scale mining operations. And yet, on some ridges and cliff faces, excavators have discovered pits and gouges with a peculiar uniformity in their depth and pattern. These are not signs of erosion or modern quarrying. They appear to be hand-dug mines created with primitive tools. In one spot near Galena, explorers found a cave with soot-blackened ceilings and copper stains on the walls, evidence of ancient torchlight and metal-rich soil, long since deserted. No official archaeological excavation has ever been carried out there. The site is remote, difficult to reach, and located on private property. The idea that ancient Illinoisans were mining their own copper does not fit neatly into the accepted historical narrative. It suggests a degree of autonomy and specialization rarely attributed to early Midwestern cultures. And it raises a critical question. What were they doing with all that copper? Some of it was fashioned into tools, certainly, but a significant portion, especially the finer, thinner pieces, was used for ceremonial or symbolic purposes. Copper was considered a spiritual substance, believed to hold life force, energy, and divine power. The Mississippians, for example, crafted elaborate copper plates, hammered into the shapes of birds, warriors, and cosmic entities. These were interred in the graves of the elite, worn by shamans, or presented as offerings to the gods. Could it be that copper was more than just a resource? It was a sacred material. Here is a chilling twist. Some researchers believe that certain copper artifacts found in Illinois do not match the chemical profile of Michigan copper. This means they may have originated from unknown or now depleted Illinois sources. If this is true, it points to a lost copper culture, one that operated on a smaller, localized scale, whose mines were abandoned, forgotten, or erased. What became of them? That is the real puzzle. If these people possessed mining expertise, trade routes, and spiritual uses for copper, why did it all cease? Why do these tools disappear from the archaeological record after about 1200 AD? One theory suggests that environmental changes, such as the cooling climate of the Little Ice Age, force people to migrate or abandon resource-intensive activities. Others propose that the rise of Cahokia and centralized Mississippian power structures either absorbed or eliminated smaller, independent groups. In this scenario, the copper workers were integrated into a larger religious and political system, or they were eradicated by it. But the silence is profound. There are no written accounts, no clear evidence of copper-smelting communities in Illinois, just the tools, the fragments, the pits in the earth, and the persistent question, did someone else teach them? Fringe theories, those that professional archaeologists often dismiss, but which continue to circulate online and in local folklore, suggest that copper mining in North America may have been influenced by Old World knowledge. Proponents point to striking similarities between some copper-working techniques and those found in ancient Europe or the Near East. Could Bronze Age travelers, blown off course, have reached the Great Lakes, discovered copper, and shared their skills with the local population? There is no concrete evidence, but there are stories, Native American legends of tall, red-haired men, of people arriving from the East with fire and metal. Are these merely myths or echoes of something more ancient? And what about the copper itself? Some estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of pounds of copper were extracted from the Great Lakes region in prehistoric times. Only a small fraction of this has been accounted for in known artifacts. The rest is missing. Where did it go? Did it corrode and return to the earth? Was it lost in rituals, buried, or traded so far away that it will never be found? Or was it taken by someone or something we have forgotten? In northern Illinois, the clues are still present, quietly rusting in the soil, waiting for someone to look beyond the conventional explanations, to dig not just into the ground, but into the possibility that history is much deeper and stranger than we have been led to believe. High on the wooded ridges of southern Illinois, far from the reach of modern roads and nestled deep within the Shawnee National Forest, lie the remnants of what are locally known as the stone forts. These are not forts in the conventional military sense. There are no battlements, no cannons, and no signs of colonial warfare. Instead, they are enigmatic dry stone wall structures, some extending for hundreds of feet, built with such intention and skill that they raise a question few have been able to resolve. Who constructed them, and for what purpose? More than a dozen of these stone enclosures have been identified throughout southern Illinois, from the Garden of the Gods to Millstone Bluff. Their design is deceptively straightforward. Long, low walls of stacked stone, frequently constructed along ridgetops or enclosing elevated rock formations. Some create a rough oval or circular shape, while others run in straight, sharp lines like defensive barriers. There is no mortar, only rock placed carefully upon rock, strategically and with clear intent. Mainstream archaeologists date their construction to approximately 1,500 to 2,000 years ago, during what is called the Late Woodland period. However, no one has discovered clear proof of habitation. No permanent dwellings inside, no large-scale food storage, and no obvious signs of daily life. This leads to a haunting possibility. These were not settlements. They were ritual grounds, fortifications, or something else entirely. Let's begin with the fortification theory. Some scholars propose that the stone walls were erected for defensive reasons, perhaps hastily built during times of tribal warfare. Located on high ground, they provide expansive views of the surrounding valleys, making them ideal for spotting approaching enemies. The entrances, where they exist, are narrow and easily defended. If conflicts swept through the area, these forts might have served as temporary refuges for small groups seeking to protect themselves. But this theory has its weaknesses. There is no evidence of prolonged conflict in the vicinity during the period of their construction. No arrowheads have been found buried in the earth, and there are no signs of battle or retreat. Furthermore, many of the walls would have been too low to effectively stop an attack, especially if the aggressors came from above. They might have been a deterrent, but they could not have withstood a determined siege. Others contend that they were ceremonial enclosures for rituals used by priests, shamans, or tribal elites. Some of the stone forts are aligned with celestial events, such as the sunrises and sunsets on the equinoxes and solstices. In this interpretation, the walls were not intended to keep people out, but to frame the sky. Imagine a line of stone not as a barricade, but as a horizon marker, a sacred boundary where the earth and the heavens met during rituals. This idea is strengthened by their location. Most stone forts are situated on the edges of cliffs, above rock shelters and overhangs. These are liminal spaces, the kind of landscapes connected to ancient cosmology, representing transitions between worlds, thresholds where the living could communicate with spirits or where the souls of the dead could pass. Millstone Bluff, one of the best preserved sites, features a stone wall that stretches across a mesa, with petroglyphs and burial mounds nearby. Here, archaeology and oral tradition converge. Native legends speak of spirit places on the high ridges, where one could receive visions or speak with ancestors. It is not difficult to imagine that the stone forts marked these sacred locations, serving as ritual gateways rather than defensive perimeters. And yet, there are other, stranger clues. Some walls seem to interfere with compasses, causing electromagnetic anomalies that modern hikers have noted for decades. Others have found fossilized bones embedded within the stone, not intentionally placed, but uncanny nonetheless. At a few sites, trees growing near the walls have been discovered with twisted or warped trunks, as if they are reacting to something unseen. A fringe theory posits that the stone forts were part of an ancient geodetic network designed to map energy lines, similar to ley lines in Europe or dragon lines in China. According to this view, the walls were not built for people at all, but to channel energy, perhaps during celestial events or large-scale rituals. This theory is speculative, of course, but it persists on the fringes of the mystery because the logic behind the stone forts remains elusive. Then there is the practical question: how were they built? Moving that much stone by hand, without metal tools or beasts of burden, would have required a high degree of organization and manpower. This was not a minor undertaking. It was a communal effort executed with purpose and knowledge. Whoever built them had an understanding of engineering, balance, and the landscape. And yet, no tools have been found, no workshops, no signs of long-term construction camps, just the walls standing like fossilized thoughts. Another complication is that many stone forts bear a resemblance to structures found in Europe, particularly in Scotland and Ireland. Ancient hill forts made of dry stone set along ridges and mountain paths. The similarity is striking enough to inspire theories of pre-Columbian contact, with Celtic explorers crossing the Atlantic long before Columbus and leaving their mark in stone. Most historians dismiss this idea, but they cannot ignore the stylistic parallels, even if they attribute them to coincidence. After all, the technique of dry stone construction could have developed independently. But if it didn't, what does that imply about Illinois' past? Today, many of the stone forts are barely discernible. Trees have split them apart, and moss conceals the joints. Hikers walk past without realizing that the stones at their feet once formed walls older than Christianity. Some have been completely forgotten, marked only by irregular mounds beneath leaf litter and vines. But if you know where to look, and if you stand in the right place at the right time, when the sun is low and the shadows are long, you can still trace the lines. You see the curve of the wall, the narrowing of the ridge, and you feel it, a presence not of people, but of intention, of memory embedded in stone. Whatever their purpose, the stone forts stand as a testament to something lost, a system of thought, a forgotten architecture, a culture that mapped its world not with lines on paper, but with walls in the wilderness. And like so many mysteries of ancient Illinois, they raise more questions than they answer. Who built them? Why here? And what did they know that we have forgotten? On a hillside near the small town of Golconda, in the southeastern corner of Illinois, a series of extraordinary discoveries ignited the curiosity and controversy of both amateur archaeologists and fringe theorists. In the 1920s and 1930s, local residents reported finding a number of carved stone tablets buried in shallow mounds. These were not just random scratchings or decorative pieces. They contained unknown symbols, intricate patterns, and, most remarkably, what appeared to be a form of writing. To this day, no one has been able to decipher them. No one even knows who created them. They are known simply as the Golconda stone tablets, and they're one of the most enigmatic, unsolved artifacts ever discovered in Illinois. The first tablet allegedly came to light when a farmer was plowing his field along a slope near the Ohio River. What he uncovered was not another arrowhead or a broken piece of pottery. It was a flat, polished stone, shaped like a small loaf of bread and etched with strange lines, curving glyphs, cross symbols, and repeating geometric designs. News of the discovery spread quickly, and more stones were found. Some were small enough to fit in a pocket, while others were large enough to require two hands to lift. Word of the find eventually reached collectors and amateur historians, who saw in the Golconda tablets a tantalizing possibility: ancient writing in North America. The excitement was not without reason. The symbols carved into these stones did not match any known Native American iconography, such as the pictographs of the Mississippian or Hopewell cultures. Nor were they crude markings. They looked deliberate, systematic, and possibly part of a script. Some bore a resemblance to Mediterranean or Semitic alphabets, while others looked vaguely like Chinese or early Phoenician glyphs. This led to the obvious and controversial question: did people from the Old World visit prehistoric Illinois? If that sounds improbable, consider this. The Ohio River, just a few miles from Golconda, was once a superhighway of the ancient world. Long before the existence of roads or railways, it connected the Mississippi River to the east. Goods, people, and ideas traveled along its banks. It is not impossible to imagine that early explorers, whether indigenous or foreign, might have used it to journey inland. Fringe historians quickly adopted the tablets as potential evidence of pre-Columbian contact. Theories abounded. Carthaginians, Phoenicians, or even Egyptians navigating up the Mississippi and leaving cryptic messages behind. Others argued that the tablets belonged to a lost native civilization that had developed its own form of proto-writing. After all, cultures like the Olmec and Zapotec had experimented with writing in Mesoamerica. Why not in North America as well? But mainstream scholars were skeptical and, eventually, dismissive. The Golconda tablets were never formally excavated. They were passed from one private owner to another, sold at auctions, and stored in dusty drawers. Some disappeared entirely. Others were donated to small museums or forgotten in attics. With each passing year, the documentation became thinner, their provenance faded, and so did academic interest. A few skeptics labeled the tablets as outright forgeries, manufactured curiosities intended for a quick sale. The early 20th century, after all, saw a surge in archaeological fakes as farmers and hobbyists learned they could carve a stone, claim it was ancient, and sell it to collectors eager for relics. But even among the dubious items of that era, the Golconda stones were different. Their craftsmanship was too refined, the weathering appeared authentic, and the symbols were not copied from any known alphabet. So if they were not fakes, what were they? Some researchers who have examined the surviving tablets have noted that the carvings do not overlap or contradict one another, suggesting they may follow an internal logic, the hallmark of a real writing system. One particular stone, roughly triangular in shape, features a repeating sequence of glyphs around its edge, like the beginning and end of a sentence. Another displays a central spiral surrounded by radiating lines and what appear to be tiny tally marks, possibly a calendar or a numerical record. Then there's the question of their purpose. No one knows if they were sacred objects, trade markers, ritual items, or even funerary inscriptions. None have been found in graves, at least not officially. Some locals claim that the tablets were buried near old mound sites, possibly as offering stones, but these accounts are secondhand and largely unverified. There's also a theory that the Golconda stones were not meant to be read in the modern sense, but were ritual instruments used by spiritual leaders to summon ancestors or communicate with deities. In this interpretation, the symbols are less about conveying information and more about expressing intention, a sacred language known only to a select few, perhaps not spoken, but only dreamed. The mystery deepens when you consider what is missing: context. No large settlement has been associated with the tablet discoveries. No known workshop, temple, or city has been linked to their origin. They seem to exist in isolation, like echoes of a culture that was here briefly and then either vanished or concealed itself so effectively that all we have are these stone whispers. And yet, similar tablets have been found in other parts of the Midwest, including Missouri, Indiana, and Kentucky, all with equally strange markings, all unclaimed, untranslated, and unexplained. Were these isolated finds or scattered pieces of a forgotten script used across a wider territory than we have ever imagined? What makes the Golconda case particularly tragic is how little has been done since their discovery. With modern technology, laser scanning, 3D imaging, and AI pattern recognition, it is possible we could begin to decipher them. But they remain in obscurity, misfiled, misunderstood, and all the while, erosion, mishandling, and neglect are slowly erasing what little is left. There's a moment, standing on the hills near Golconda, when the wind rustles through the grass, and you remember that this land is old, older than state lines, older than towns. Something came before. People carved their thoughts in a stone here, with purpose, and we have forgotten the meaning. Perhaps the Golconda tablets were part of a code never meant to be broken, a language for another time, another mind. Or maybe, just maybe, they hold the key to a history far richer and far stranger than we have ever been allowed to know. Beneath the fertile farmland of central Illinois, in places where the soil has been tilled 1,000 times, lies the final mystery on our list. This one is not marked by monuments or bones, but by the sudden and violent disappearance not of people, but of entire settlements, towns that seemed to prosper only to vanish from the archaeological and historical record without any clear explanation. Among the most perplexing is the case of the ancient lost village near Havana, Illinois, a thriving community along the Illinois River that once pulsed with life and then mysteriously became deserted. The Havana Hopewell culture, as archaeologists refer to it, flourished in the area approximately 2,000 years ago. These people constructed mounds, ceremonial centers, and sprawling villages, and they traded copper, obsidian, and marine shells across thousands of miles. The Illinois River was their lifeline, the land was abundant, and their artistry was sophisticated. And then, around 300 CE, everything changed. The village, which had become a central hub for ceremony and trade, was abruptly abandoned. The mounds were left undisturbed. Tools and pottery were found scattered, as if dropped in the middle of use. And there were no indications of war, famine, or disease, just an eerie, complete halt to all activity. What occurred? Archaeologists have been grappling with this question for over a century. Early theories pointed to environmental collapse. Perhaps flooding from the river forced the inhabitants to leave, but sediment analysis reveals no major flood events during the village's final years. Others suggested resource depletion, soil exhaustion, or overhunting, but surveys of the region indicate that the land remained fertile and that game was still plentiful. And there is something even more peculiar. Excavations have shown that burials at the site ceased abruptly, as if the people stopped honoring their dead in the traditional manner. In Hopewell culture, elaborate burial rituals were fundamental to social and religious life. For a community to stop burying its dead signified a profound cultural breakdown, a sudden shift in worldview or population. One possibility is that a new spiritual belief system emerged, one that rejected the old customs, leading people to desert the ceremonial site. But what could have prompted such a drastic break with tradition? Vision, catastrophe, Visertation. This is where the mystery deepens. Among the local indigenous legends passed down through generations of the Illinois and Miami tribes are stories of a great silence, a time when the sky changed and the people could no longer hear the voices of the spirits. These tales describe the departure of the gods or spirit beings who once walked among humans and then suddenly cut off all contact. Some versions mention a great fire in the sky, followed by weeks of darkness and unnatural weather. To modern ears, this sounds like a myth. To ancient people, it may have been a profound spiritual trauma, a cosmological event that shattered their society. Was it a meteor, a comet, or a solar eclipse that was interpreted as the death of the sun? Whatever it was, something fundamental shifted, and the people of Havana walked away from the river and the life they had built. Curiously, similar disappearances happened at other Hopewell sites across the Midwest around the same time, as if an entire culture spanning multiple states began to collapse or transform into something new, almost simultaneously. But not all the evidence points to natural causes. There are those who suggest something more unsettling. Some of the last structures discovered at the Havana site exhibit odd construction patterns, burned layers that are not typical of domestic fires, but appear more controlled, enclosed, and possibly ritualistic in nature. One structure shows signs of being deliberately sealed, its entrances filled with earth and stone, as if to keep something in or something out. No one knows what or why. Then there are the artifacts, ceramic fragments decorated with imagery that some say depicts unusual beings, not stylized humans or animals, but figures with large eyes, elongated limbs, and postures that suggest flight or levitation. Conventional archaeologists interpret these as mythical figures or shamanic visions. Others, more speculative in their thinking, suggest extraterrestrial contact. It is an uncomfortable theory, but one that continues to surface, especially when paired with other ancient stories from the region, tales of sky visitors, star people, and beings who descended on pillars of smoke and sound. In those stories, the visitors imparted wisdom and then departed, and the people, lost without their guidance, eventually turned on one another or faded into silence. But what if the visitors never left willingly? What if something went awry? The Havana site is located not far from a known magnetic anomaly, an area where electromagnetic readings spike unnaturally, disrupting compasses and radio signals. These anomalies are rarely mentioned in archaeological literature, but explorers and researchers have noted their effects. Could this region have once possessed a kind of natural energy that drew people here? Could a sudden change in that energy have triggered the collapse? We may never know. The site today is mostly farmland. The mounds have been flattened, and the soil has been plowed. What was not taken by treasure hunters has been quietly lost to time. A few preserved relics can be found in small museums, but their context is gone, and with it, the ability to piece together the full story. And yet, beneath the crops and fence lines, the footprints are still there. A vanished village, built with care, vibrant with ceremony, then abandoned overnight. The silence that followed still lingers, like an echo trapped in the earth itself. Of all the ancient mysteries in Illinois, this may be the most unsettling. Not because it is the most violent or the most bizarre, but because it is the most human. There were people like us, builders, artists, dreamers, and one day they simply walked away. No goodbye, no war, no graves, just an empty village and a sky that would never speak again.